Hello, welcome to Kepware's webinar. For this webinar, as I present, my colleague and fellow application engineer, you may have seen him there, Sam Elsner, is going to be answering any questions that you enter into the questions pane. So go ahead, type questions in the questions pane, and if we can't answer something that you asked during the webinar, we're certainly going to follow up with you. Also, for this, if you like our webinar here and you're looking for more material from us, you can always check out our YouTube page. We have lots of webinars posted up there, and the recording for this will be up there when we're done today. Also, if you're interested in more training, we do offer a training class here in Portland once monthly, as well as other training opportunities, so check out our training page at the link there. So before we begin, I'm a big fan of polls, and I wanted to poll you guys first. These polls help us to understand what our audience is, who we're talking to, so I can tailor the content to who is joined with us here. So what is your role in your company? Do you belong to scanner group, measurement group, both, or something else? And you can type your answer in the other pane. Okay, great. Thanks for answering there. It looks like we got a few people who dedicated to SCADA. Nobody, surprisingly, in measurement, and then quite a few, about over 50% of you, that are in both. So that's great. This webinar should definitely be helpful for everybody that's on the line. And what we're going to cover today is OMNI Flow computer configuration for connecting to KEPServerEX. And one of the first things we're going to do is use Omni software called OmniCom to look at a Flow computer's configuration file. And the reason we're going to do that is because we're going to use the information we see in that configuration file to map data to KEPServerEX in order to get that measurement. And then we're actually going to get into KEPServerEX during the demo and set up the connection to the OMNI Flow computer and then set up the server to export that measurement data. Okay, so you guys may have noticed already that I love polls, so I'm going to have a couple more poll questions here. First, how much experience do you have configuring KEPServerEX? One, that you've never seen it before, never downloaded it, and 5 you're an expert. Okay, great. Looks like we got mixed bag across the board, pretty even distribution in all the areas there. And then now, how much experience do you have using OMNI Flow computer devices? Okay, so definitely more leaning towards the beginner for OMNI Flow computer devices. So that's great. So I'll spend a little time talking about KEPServerEX in general, and then we'll go a little slower through Omni in general. Alright, so first thing we're going to look at is how data is structured in these OMNI Flow computers. And the reason we're going to do that is because understanding this will conceptually help us understand how the server is going to consume data. If we know how it's structured in the Flow computer, we can understand how our software is going to bring it in, right? So an OMNI Flow computer has 12 archives, and 10 of these archives, 701 through 710, are configurable, which means the user can put in any data in those records that they want. And then the other 2 archives, alarm and audit, those are going to be fixed. So what we're interested in is 701 through 710. And each of these archives can be split into multiple records. And one record might be equivalent to maybe one run or batch of data, right? And one archive can actually store quite a few records, can store up to 840 records for these Omni devices, which equates to about 35 days worth of data. You can have 35 days worth of data in that Flow computer before you start losing data. Now, one record itself is about 250 bytes, and what information you have in that 250 bytes that you're reading is the registers that you're going to reference in that specific Flow computer that give you data. Typically, someone using these Flow computers will be interested in hourly, daily, and batch data. So if that's the case, they might choose 701 for hourly, 702 for daily, and 703 for batch. So we're actually going to focus on 703 for batch in this case because we're looking specifically at a liquid measurement case. Okay. These records, like I said, can be split up into finer detail on what we call registers. So you might have registers in the Flow computer that contain certain information like average pressure or temperature, and each register is going to take up a section of that record. and each register takes up 4 bytes. Okay? So this is how our archive is going to be split up and segmented, and in a moment we're going to see how these record numbers and register numbers correspond to information that you're going to need to enter into KEPServerEX so that we can properly get this information. Okay, so it's clear that in order to properly configure KEPServerEX to connect to your OMNI Flow computers, you need to get a look into the device and see what is in the device. Since this is all configurable, all of this information in here can be configurable by the user. So to get a look into the device, what we do is we use a software called OmniCom. And I have the OmniCom software right here on my desktop. So I'm going to open that up. And if you're opening this up and connecting to a device, you're going to want to go to Actions and open it in Configure mode. And then I'm going to go ahead and look at my archives. And like I said, we're going to look at archive 703 because we're going to specifically be looking at batch data. And previous to this webinar, I came in and I entered some register points that I know were specific to batch data. So here we see that the first register in this record is 4131. So that takes up the first space of that 250 bytes of that record, and we see right now we're only using slots 1 through 5 in this record, so about 50 bytes of the 250 bytes that we have available. Okay, how did I get this information? Where did I know 4131 and 7118? I actually used a configuration file to do that. So I have a little manual here, an Omni manual, configuration manual, and if I open that up, I can see what these registers mean, right? So if I search for 4N31, I see that if N is meter number, so 4131 is for meter number 1, that's previous batch start date. And let's look at something else I have here. So 7118, or let's do 8501. 8501. I see 8501 corresponds to data in meter 1, and that's previous batch average temperature, right? So that's the way that I populated information in here, is by looking at this manual and pulling the registers that I knew were relevant to me. So once I've entered all these point numbers or attributes of interest in here, I've entered them manually as a user. What I need to do is get that into KEPServer somehow. So once you connect KEPServerEX to the Flow computer, what our software is going to do is walk the Flow computer and read all of the archives in this Flow computer all at once. What that means is we get this big chunk of data, right? That big block of data from the beginning. So all of these archives. But there's a catch, because in this big chunk of data, there's nothing that tells us how to segment it. So there's literally nothing in that data that says, hey, 4113 is the first register in that packet in archive 703. So we need some way to distinguish one byte or one register from another. And that's why you have to do something called mapping. So you have to map the registers that you entered here into KEPServerEX so we know how to segment this big chunk of data. So I'm going to go ahead and open KEPServerEX, show you how to do this. I actually already have an Omni channel and device set up here. Now, if you've never used KEPServerEX before, this is what we call the configuration. So very similar to how OmniCom, you use this interface to connect to the device and configure the device. In KEPServerEX, you use this interface to connect to what we call our runtime and get data from devices and configure your projects and your connections to devices. And the way you make a connection to the device is you build a channel and a device. And a channel is simply a path of communication. So I can right click here and go New Channel. And you're just defining how you're communicating with that device. So you see on the channel level we have a bunch of different devices and drivers that we support. So we have ABB Total Flow, Bristol, we have Fisher Rock, and then of course relevant to this webinar we have Omni. So when I created that Omni channel, I selected OMNI Flow Computer driver, and then here I selected my connection type, so whether it's over a COM serial port or Ethernet. So that's what I did to create the channel, and then I went ahead and created a device. So if we get into device properties here, you can see that I selected OMNI Liquid firmware and entered an ID. And mostly, you see there's a lot of tabs here, a lot of options here, but when I was in the device creation wizard, I mostly just left everything there in default and then created the device, and now I'm getting back into device properties to reconfigure things. So I didn't really go through. Really the only things that I customized were selecting liquid firmware here on the device level, and then on the channel level making sure I selected, the OMNI Flow Computer driver. So the most important things, two most important things in this device properties window are the EFM meters tab and the EFM mapping tab. So the first thing I'm going to do is get here into EFM meters. And this is just to show you that this is where I configure the different meters I might have connected to that flow computer. So you can have up to 4 meters. You might have a shared archive on that computer, and then maybe some advanced options there as well. And for example, in meter 1, these numbers you see, this hourly archive number, and it has a 1, that references the archive in the flow computer. So the 1 here references archive 701. And if I entered a 2 here, that would reference archive 702, and if I entered a 3, that would be 703, and so on. Okay? So you enter your archive numbers here, your archive index numbers here, to connect to those specific meters. Now the next most important tab, or the most important tab for this demo, is this EFM mapping tab, and this is where we're going to do the majority of the work. So this is how I tell the software to segment these records. I go and I see here that I have an alarm mapping that I can do, which is fairly simple, and then I have this history mapping that I can do. And I see that I have mapping for hourly history. There's a bunch of hourly data that I can pull in, as well as composition info. Same thing for daily and also for batch. And so we're going to play around mostly for the demo in this batch window for our example. Okay, so let's look at this diagram to understand how we're going to, because we need to know, okay, what numbers do I enter here that tells the software what's in this archive, right? Because the numbers here don't quite look the same as what's in here. So how did I get these numbers, basically? Okay, so here's my archive configuration. That's what I have configured. And we enter into KEPServerEX basically a pointer that we call a register offset. So those are the numbers that you saw in KEPServerEX, that history mapping window. And this register offset we determine by assigning each slot in this packet a number. Right, so we say 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 for each register that's referenced in that record archive. So for example, previous batch average temperature, that's 8501 if you remember that from the manual that we were looking at. So register 8501, batch average temperature, and that's in the 5th spot with the 0 based offset. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, because there's 2 point counts from the beginning, and I'm getting to 8501, right? And so 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, that's the 5th spot for 8501. So I know that if I want batch average temperature, I need to enter a 4. Okay, now each register maps to a single attribute. However, there's one specific exception, which is batch start date and time. So batch start date and time, this 4131 is batch start date and 4132 is batch start time. But if you notice in our software we have this 0:2 here, and we only have one field for batch start, and that's because of how we have to read that data from the Omni device to be able to convert it for export. So when I enter a 0 here, I'm saying start at the 0 position, at the 0 pointer position, and read until you reach the second position, and then combine those two results into one field. So basically we're taking batch start date and combining it with batch start time in that one field, and that's what that 0:2 will get you. And don't worry, that's the only attribute that is like that. It's just unique to batch start date and time. So the 0:2 we're going to leave here, because in the beginning of my record here I have 4131 and 4132 for batch start date and time. And I enter 0:2 to indicate that we're combining those two fields to get the batch start. Okay, so let's go through this a little slower again to show exactly the process I would take to map all of this out. So step one, when you're looking at your archive configuration, is you're going to transpose all the register numbers you have here into columns. So I transpose them. So I have 4131 and 4131 here, and then 2 point counts, so I know 4132, 7118 with a point count of 2, so then 7119, and then 8501, and so on down the line. Then I start assigning my register offsets. So I start with 0 and just keep on going down the line, and I get to 7118, starts at position 2, and then I know it's +1 register because it's 2 point count. 7119 gets position 3, and then I keep on going down the line like that. And I go all the way until I reach the end of my packet here, which is 5113, which happens to be my meter factor. Okay? And I basically just continue doing that until I have all my indices assigned. And then I need to take these numbers that I just configured here, these bottom numbers here, and these are the numbers that I enter into KEPServerEX. So I have those numbers down there, and I'm going to look at, move this window a little bit so we can see. I'm going to look at how that maps to these fields in my batch mapping. So I see here I already have some numbers here, but for example batch ID number 3, that doesn't really match any register I actually have in configured in my record. So I'm actually just going to delete these, because sometimes these default properties will not necessarily be correct or map correctly to your flow computer. So I'm going to delete what's in here so that I can go ahead and enter my own information. So for example, maybe I want to get the batch temperature, right? So I know that's 8501 and that's position 4. So here I get meter temperature, and I'm going to put in a 4. And then I want to get the pressure as well, and that's 8502. So, and that's position number 5. So I'm going to go ahead and put in a 5. And then my meter factor is the last thing I need, and that's position 8. So then I'm going to put in an 8. And notice that I didn't pull everything that I had configured to record in that meter. So maybe there's some things that I'm recording, but I've decided not to pull them for whatever reason. That's possible too. You don't have to pull everything that you have configured. So I click OK there and apply, and I should be ready to go. I've mapped the information that I had in my OMNI device, all my registers, to device properties. So any questions there? All right, we have a question here. Does data type matter? And the answer is yes. So the driver supports all the data types that you see here, as well as 2-byte integer, 4-byte integer, and float, and 8 and 16-byte string register. So it would have to be that 8 or 16-byte ASCII, a float, integer, in order for us to consume that data. Okay, so since OMNI Flow computers are so configurable, we have to have users go through this mapping process per flow computer, and it's just the nature of the beast because of how OMNI forces us to read data from their flow computers. The good news is, though, is once you do this process and go through and do this mapping, if you would just have a standard flow computer setup, maybe you have 50 flow computers, and every single flow computer, the registers are configured exactly the same for each archive and for each record, then you only have to do this mapping once. So it's really just a one-time issue, and then maybe they just change slightly, so you just go back and change some things, and you can export and import those for as many devices as you have configured. So you can export and import that mapping and not have to do it every single time, which is nice. So that's good news. A few finer details on this mapping too is the cool thing. So for example, for flow time here in daily history, flow time attribute is actually measured in half-second ticks. So in order to convert that to seconds, you'd need to divide by 120, right? Well, you can actually enter that right in the configuration mapping, just divide by 120, and the software, the KEPServerEX, will do that for you without you ever having to go back and redo it again or do it in some other software. So you know, divide by 120, and we do support that. Okay. Any other questions there before we move on? We're going to move on to the export part of this, where we're going to export the measurement data in a flowcal format. Okay, great. So once I've had this mapping completed, I'm ready to export my data, and we export that using what we call our EFM plugin. So EFM, Electronic Flow Measurement, and I go up to this little drop-down menu here, and this shows you all our plugins. And our EFM exporter is one of those plugins. I get in there, and the first thing I'm going to do is just add a poll group. So very simple. Maybe I call this OMNI 1. And I can do on-demand polling, or I can poll at a specific time, depending on time of day. Okay? So once I create that poll group, then I can add gas meters to that poll group, so they poll at the same time, or liquid meters, and we're working with a liquid meter in this case. So I'm going to go ahead and add a new meter. And here I have the option of adding a meter, and I actually have the option to browse the server for meters that I've already set up. So I click this little browse button, and there's my handy omni-channel device and that meter that I just set up. So I click apply, and oops, I noticed something here. All of a sudden daily and batch checkboxes got grayed out. So seems like there's a problem, because I definitely want to export daily and batch data. So what do I do? Okay, so I'm going to click OK. Something went wrong. It's probably in device properties for my Omni device. So I click OK. I'm going to go ahead, go back up here to my channel and device view, and get back into device properties and see what went wrong. And if you remember, I said this EFM meters tab, important for you to look at when you're configuring these devices. And I look and I see, oh, for meter 1, I actually didn't enter a daily archive or batch archive number. So I go ahead and enter 2 for the daily archive, and 3 for the batch archive, so that's 701, 702, 703 for hourly, daily, and batch. And I click apply and close, and that should, if I get back into my EFM exporter, solve my issues. So get back into properties here for this meter, and now I see, yes, I have the option to export daily and batch. So just a good sanity check to make sure that you configured things properly. Okay, so the last step is creating your exporter, and we have a flowcal exporter available for liquid measurement now, and you can select based on history type 11, 12, or 13, hourly or daily, and select where you're going to be storing that data, that exported data, every time you issue a poll. And this is pretty cool, or I think it's cool because I'm kind of a dork, but you have these what we call wildcards. So we have this vertical pipe poll group named vertical pipe. That's a wildcard, and that helps you segment your files and your folders based on different things. So for each meter, you can have a separate exported file. Just a nice organizational tool for you. So I click OK, and as soon as I click OK, you see my first poll is scheduled for 4 p.m. So that's the next hit of the hour after I had created that poll group that polls every hour. Okay, so the first time it'll poll is at 4 p.m. on the hour. Also notice here that I have a demo timer that started because I don't have the EFM exporter license. So you see my demo timer, it's a 2-hour timer, has started counting down. So kind of cool thing about KEPServerEX is we do allow you to download fully functional software. You can download everything, install everything, and use it all. The only restriction is this 2-hour demo timer. But you can restart that demo timer. So as soon as the demo expires, you can actually get it to restart by going right-clicking on the icon down here in your task tray and going to stop runtime service. And then start runtime service again, and it will restart that demo timer for you. And there you go, you see my demo timer started again. Any other questions there? Alright, we're getting a question, does this support Modbus, or does the Modbus suite come with Omni? Actually, this comes in the oil and gas suite. If you go to Kepware.com and our products purchase page, if you go to Kepware.com and go to our purchasing page, you'll see our oil and gas suite, which includes all our Flow computer drivers as well as a bunch of Modbus drivers as well. So that's what you'd want. Now our Modbus suite does include, if I find the Modbus suite here, does include Modbus RTU, which can get some real-time data from OMNI Flow Computers. But in order to use the exported measurement data and use our EFM exporter, you would need the OMNI Flow computer driver specifically. Okay? So good question there. Alright, so in conclusion here, remember we definitely want to have this manual when we're configuring these OMNI Flow computers. OMNI Flow computers have about 8 firmware versions that I know of, and each version is going to change the fundamental behavior and configuration of the meter. So one meter might be configured this way, and if it's a different meter, it could be completely different registers that you need. So for example, if you're working on a liquid orifice, you want attributes that are correspond to maybe mass or differential pressure. But if you're using a liquid turbine or positive displacement meter, you're going to want different attributes and different registers. And each of these type of meters has a different register mapping, which is outlined by these different configuration manuals. So I was using this 2024 V4 Rev C document to look up my configuration. That's how I knew, 8501 was previous batch average temperature. So, for example, 5113, if we look at 5113, which was our meter factor for meter 1, corresponds to that for these type of devices, but that might change for something else. Now, you're going to want this documentation as well as your Omni configuration file, which you load into OmniCom in order to be able to get the information you need to enter into KEPServerEX. And I know it can be troublesome, so if you need help, you can always contact us. You can contact me at training, or you can contact our tech support. We'd certainly be happy to help you, but we will also need this documentation as well as your Omni configuration file in order to guide you and be able to help you with the mapping. So if you can get your hands on that, it's very important. Okay, so let's end with a poll question, because I love poll questions, obviously. So the big question of the day, are you currently using or will you in the future use Omni Driver and KEPServerEX? So if you wouldn't mind answering that, yes, you're currently using, yes, you will in the future, unsure or no, go ahead and let us know. If you're not going to use this, and it's because there's some functionality that's missing, please, please, please let us know. Steve Sponseller, our product manager for oil and gas, would really be happy to hear from you. We want to make this product useful for people. So if there's some functionality missing that we should implement in order to help you and make it useful for you, please let us know. Contact us, email us. We'd be happy to help. Okay, well, thank you so much for joining this webinar. Remember, you can email me, training@kepware.com, or as always, sales and technical support. You can call us on the phone. And of course, you can get that free demo with the 2-hour demo timer fully functional at Kepware.com. All right, thank you very much for joining, and we will see you another time.